Sir, we're gonna let him get away.
No, Carl, you let him get away.
Nobody had a better brain on my
Merry Christmas!
parade.
I'm getting close, huh? You will go to prison.
You're gonna have to catch me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Frank Abongale.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I've seen the movie twice in my lifetime, seen the trailer about 1,000 times. Lifetime. This is the 9th presentation I'm making for this organization. It's very rare for me when I do go out and speak. It's always just at an event or a convention. I don't get to speak to for the same company 9 consecutive times across the country. So it's been an honor to work with such a great company, a great team of people. And tonight's the last night of those 9 nights. It's been a real pleasure. So I speak tonight. I know some of you have heard me before, so I apologize for being repetitious. And those of you new, hope that you enjoy the program, and we will take questions. It's been very nice for me. I teach at the FBI Academy at Quantico, so this is one of the few times I was able to get in the car and just drive to an event instead of having to get on a plane and fly to an event. I normally take the podium to talk about forgery, embezzlement, cyber crimes, identity theft, and things of that nature. But this group has always asked me to talk really about my life, in which the film Catch Me If You Can was made, and then spend about 30 minutes taking questions. And those questions can be about any subject matter, whether it be the movie or cyber or whatever the case may be. I'll be happy to answer those questions. You know, I've had a lot of people tell my story. I had a great a book writer write a book about my life, had a great film director make a movie about my life, had a great Broadway musical team make a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical about my life. Many of those very creative people have actually never met me personally, but they've enjoyed telling my story from their point of view. So I thought I would just take a moment to see if I can tell you the story from my point of view. I was raised just north of New York City in Westchester County, New York, in a little town called Bronxville. I was actually one of 4 children in the family, the so-called middle child of the 4. I was educated there by the Christian Brothers of Ireland in a private Catholic school called Iona in New Rochelle, New York, where I went to school from kindergarten to high school. By the time I had reached the age of 16 in the 10th grade, my parents, after 22 years of marriage, one day decided to get a divorce. Unlike most divorces, where the children are usually the first to know, my parents were very good about keeping that a secret. I remember being in the 10th grade when the father walked in the classroom and asked the brother to excuse me from class. When I came out in the hallway, the father handed me my books and told me that one of the brothers was driving to the county seat in White Plains, New York, where I would meet my parents, and they would explain what was going on. I remember the brother dropped me at the steps of a big stone building and told me to go on up the steps, and my parents would be waiting for me in the lobby. I remember climbing the steps, seeing the sign on the building that said family court, but I really didn't understand what that meant. When I arrived in the lobby, my parents were not there, but I was ushered into the back of an immense courtroom where my parents were standing before a judge. I couldn't hear what the judge was saying nor my parents' response, but eventually the judge saw me at the back of the room and he motioned me to approach the bench, so I walked up to stand in between my parents. I remember distinctly that the judge never looked at me. He never acknowledged I was standing there. He just went back to read from his papers and said that my parents were getting a divorce. And because I was 16 years of age, I would need to tell the court which parent I chose to live with. I started to cry, so I turned and ran out of the courtroom. The judge called for a 10-minute recess, but by the time my parents got outside, I was gone. My mother never saw me again for about 7 years until I was a young adult. Contrary to the movie, my father never saw me or ever spoke to me again. In the mid-1960s, running away was a very popular thing for young people. A lot of them got caught up in Haight-Ashbury, the hippie scene, the drug scene. Instead, I took a few belongings from my home, packed them in a bag, and boarded what was then the New Haven and Hartford Railroad for the short train ride down to Grand Central Terminal in New York. My father did own a stationery store, but actually in Manhattan, located on the corner of 40th and Madison. Like all of us, we had to work in the store. From the time I was about 13 in the summer, I made deliveries for my dad on a bike. I knew the city very well, so naturally I started looking for the same type of work. There were a lot of signs on the windows: stock boy, delivery boy, part-time. I walked in and applied. So tell me, young man, how old are you? 16. How far did you go in high school? 10th grade. I'll hire you. I went to work for a small amount of money, a few hours a day, but I realized I couldn't support myself on that amount of money. I I also realized that as long as people believed I was 16 years old, they weren't going to pay me any more money. At 16, I was 6 foot tall. I've always had a little gray hair. My friends in school used to say that once a week when we dressed in a suit to go to mass, I looked more like a teacher than a student. So I decided to lie about my age. In New York, we had a driver's license at 16. Back then, they didn't have a photo on it, just an IBM card. So I altered just one digit of my date of birth. I was actually born in April of 1948, but I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3, and that made me 10 years older, or 26 years old. I walked around applying for the same type of work. People gave me a little more money, a few more hours, but even then, it was very difficult to make ends meet. One of the few things I had taken when I left home was a checkbook. My father had opened a checking account for me at a small community bank in Mount Vernon, New York. Had a little money in that account, so every so often I would write a check to supplement my income. $20, $25, funds were there, checks were good. But it was my friends, my peers, who would constantly say to me, you know, you're the only guy I know who walks into a bank in the middle of Manhattan, you have no account there, you don't know a soul. You talk to somebody behind a desk and they okay your check. Oh, well, my checks are good. I walked in that bank, they wouldn't touch my check. You walk in, they don't bat an eye. Years later, reporters would say that was my upbringing, mannerisms, dress, appearance, speech, whatever it was very easy to do. So consequently, when the money ran out, I kept writing those checks. Of course, the checks started to bounce. Police started looking for me as a runaway. I thought maybe it was a good time to start thinking about leaving New York City. But I was quite apprehensive about going to Chicago, Miami, wondered if they'd cash a New York check on a New York driver's license in Miami as quickly as they did in Manhattan. I was walking up 42nd Street one afternoon about 5 o'clock in the evening, 16 years old, pondering all of these things, when I started to approach the front door of an old hotel that used to be there called the Commodore Hotel, now the Grand Hyatt. Just as I was about to get to the front door of the hotel, out stepped an Eastern Airlines flight crew onto the sidewalk. I couldn't help but notice the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, about 3 or 4 flight attendants dragging their bags to the curb to load them into the van. As they loaded the van, I thought to myself, that's it. I pose as a pilot. I could travel over the world for free. I probably could get just about anybody, anywhere to cash a check for me. So I walked up the street a little further to 42nd and Park. I went to cross over. I heard a huge helicopter, so I looked up and there was New York Airways landing on the roof of the Pan Am building. Pan Am, the nation's flag carrier, the airline that flew around the world. I thought, what a perfect airline to use. So the next day I placed a phone call to the executive corporate offices of Pan Am. When the switchboard was ringing, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. When they answered, Pan American Airlines, good morning, can I help you? Yes, ma'am. I'd like to speak to somebody in the purchasing department. Purchasing? One moment. The clerk came on and said, yes, American, help me. My name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco. Been with the company about 7 years. Never had anything like this come up before. What's the problem? Oh, we flew a trip in here yesterday. We're going out today. Yesterday I sent my uniform out to the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and the cleaner say they can't find it. Here I am at the flight in about 4 hours, no uniform. Would you have a spare uniform? Certainly, back home in San Francisco, but I'd never get it here in time for my flight. Do you understand this will cost you the price of a uniform and not the company? I understand. Hold on, I'll be right back. He came back and said, my supervisor says, excuse me, you need to go down to the Well-Built Uniform Company on 5th Avenue. They're our supplier. I'll call them and let them know you're on the way. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to know. So I went down to the Well-Built Uniform Company. There was a fellow, Mr. Rosen, fitted me out in a uniform. There were black Aberdeen, the 3 gold stripes on the arm, the gray hair. I certainly looked old enough to be the pilot. When it was all done, I said, how much do I owe you? Well, the uniform's $286. I said, no problem, I'll write you a check. No, I can't take any checks. Oh, well then I'll just pay you cash. And we can't accept cash. You need to fill out this computer card. Then in these boxes, put your employee number. Then we bill this back on the uniform allowance. Comes out of your next paycheck. That's even better. Go ahead and do that. New York had 2 airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy. LaGuardia was 20 minutes from Manhattan. Kennedy was 50. Naturally, LaGuardia being the closer of the 2, that's where I went. I spent most of the morning walking around LaGuardia in the uniform, trying to figure out now that I had the uniform, how the hell do you get on these planes? Well, I got a little hungry about lunchtime, so I walked in the luncheonette, sat down at the counter on the stool, and ordered a sandwich. Moments later, a TWA crew walked in. Flight attendants sat in the booth, but the pilots up at the counter on either side of me, captain right next to me. Now, back before deregulation of the airlines, airline people thought of themselves as just one big family. They didn't hesitate a moment to talk to each other, and the captain kind of leaned over. "Hey, young man, how's Pan Am doing?" "Doing just fine, Captain." "Tell me, what's Pan Am doing out here at LaGuardia?" "Pan Am doesn't fly into LaGuardia, they only fly into Kennedy." Well, I picked up on that right away. Yeah, we came into Kennedy, had a short layover, came over to visit some friends of mine. Matter of fact, I'm on my way back to Kennedy now. So tell me, young man, what type of equipment are you on? Airline people have a lot of jargon for things, and one of them is they never call a plane or an aircraft. They call it equipment, and what type of equipment you're on, and what type of plane you fly. Back then, the DC-8 to 707. Of course, I didn't know that, and I thought, what type of equipment am I on? Only equipment I'm on is a stool. That must mean what type of equipment is on the planes I fly. So I thought, well, they got the wings, they got the engine. I always had a sticker on the engine, who manufactured the engine. So I said, yes, General Electric. All three pilots kind of just stopped eating and leaned over. Captain said, oh, really? What do you fly, washing machines? I knew I said the wrong thing, out the door I went. Everybody had an airline ID card, plastic, laminated card, much like a driver's license today. Yet without the ID card, the uniform was worthless. Went back to Manhattan pretty discouraged, thinking where would I come up with the Pan American Airline corporate ID. I was sitting in a hotel room, I noticed the big, thick Manhattan yellow pages on the dresser. So I pulled them down on the bed, flipped them open, and looked under the word identification. There were 3 or 4 pages of companies who made convention badges, metal badges, plastic badges, police badges, fire badges. Started to call around, and finally one company said, listen, most of those airline IDs manufactured by Polaroid, 3M company, need to call one of them. Finally got the 3M company on the phone in Manhattan. Yeah, we manufacture Pan Am's identification system, along with a number of other carriers. How come? Tell you I'm a purchasing officer for a major U.S. carrier. I'm in New York just for the day. We're getting ready to expand our routes, hire a lot of new employees, go to a formal ID. But we're very impressed with the Pan Am format. Whenever I came by your office this afternoon briefly, we could discuss quantity and price. By all means, come on by. So I went by dressed in a suit, and the sales rep opened the book. Yeah, we do United, Braniff, National, Pan Am. Pan Am. We like this Pan Am format. Wonder if you have a sample I can bring back. Sure, I'll be right back. And he brought me back a 5x7 glossy piece of paper with a picture of an ID card blown up in the middle of it, someone else's picture in the picture, John Doe for a name, in bold writing across the front, this is a sample only. I said, no, I'm afraid this won't do. I need to bring back an actual physical card. And by the way, what is all this equipment on the floor? I know we don't just sell these cards, we sell the system, camera, laminator. See, so we have to buy all this. Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, since we have to buy it all, why don't you just demonstrate how it works and use me? Fine, now see right here. I took my picture, made it a card, and out the door I went. I was going down the elevator studying the card. It had a blue border across the top, about 1/4 inch in Pan Am's color blue, but not a single thing on the card said Pan Am. No logo, no insignia, no company name. This was a plastic card, like a credit card. Couldn't type on it, couldn't write on it, couldn't print on it. Discouraged, I put it in my pocket. Headed back to the hotel. As I was walking back, I noticed that I had passed a hobby shop, so I turned around and walked back. Excuse me, sir, I see you sell a lot of models here. You sell models of commercial jetliners? Sure, over there. I bought a model of a Pan Am 707 cargo jet, took it back to my room, opened the box, threw all the parts out, but there at the bottom of the box was a sheet of decals that went on the model. And when soaked in a glass of water, the little Pan Am blue globe that would have went on the tail of the plastic plane went perfect up at the top of the plastic card. And the word Pan Am and the special styling and graphics that would have went on the fuselage went perfect across the top of the card on the clear decal and the lamination made a beautiful identification card. Pan Am says they estimate that between the ages of 16 and 18, I flew more than 1 million miles for free, boarded more than 260 commercial aircraft in more than 26 countries around the world. Pan Am says keep in mind that though Frank Abongale did in fact pose as one of our pilots for a long extended period of time, he never once stepped on board one of our aircraft. That's true. I never flew on Pan Am because I was afraid someone might say to me, I'm based in San Francisco, been out there 16 years. I don't recall ever meeting you before. Or someone might say, your ID card is not exactly like my ID card. So instead, I flew on everyone else. If I wanted to go somewhere, I literally just walked out to the airport and looked on the board. United Flight 800 to Chicago. I then went downstairs to the door marked United Operations and walked in. The operations clerk would simply see the uniform and go, "Hey, Pan Am, what can we do for you?" Just wondered if the jump seat's open on 800. He did it, Chicago. Jump seat, it's open this evening. Like to get a pink slip pass. I'd give my ID, he'd write me out a pass. I'd walk out and hand it to the flight attendant. She'd open the door to the cockpit, and I'd step in. They had a captain, a co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a seat behind the captain called the jump seat, where pilots deadhead on company time. Now, because pilots love to talk shop, once you picked up that jargon, it was the same conversation over and over and over. So I just step on board, give a gentleman, Bob Davis, be right in Chicago. On the taxi out, always the same question. So Bob, how long have you been with Pan Am? Been flying about 7 years. What position do you fly? Right seat, which is airline terminology for a co-pilot. What type of equipment are you on? I didn't down. Perfect. Matter of fact, whatever they flew, I didn't fly. So I had no problem with that. When we'd arrive in Chicago, I'd go by the Pan Am ticket counter, but just enough to get the attention of the passenger service rep. "Sir, excuse me, I'm late over here in about a year. Yes, sir, Parma House Hilton downtown, catch a crew bus lower level door 3 out." I'd go down to Parma House Hilton, walk in, and on the corner of the registration desk was a little sign that said Airline Cruise. That was a 3-ring binder. You signed in, referenced your flight number, showed your ID. They'd give me a key. I'd stay 2 or 3 days, and Pan Am would be direct billed for my room and my meals. I also could cash a personal check at the front desk of the hotel because the airline had a contract with the hotel, and as a courtesy, they cashed a crew member's check up to $100 and vice versa. When I found out that, I would go out to the airport because every airline honored every other airline employee's personal check. A reciprocal agreement still practiced today in 2017, so that a Delta flight attendant at Dulles can go over to an American ticket counter and cash a personal check up to $100 and vice versa. So I would go out to JFK or LAX, only I'd go to everybody, Northeast, National, JFK. It would take me a good 8 hours, stopping at every counter and every building. By the time I got all the way around the other end of the airport, at least 8 hours had gone by. And what do you have in 8 hours? Shift change, new people, so I go all the way back around the other way. As you know, I went on to impersonate a doctor in a Georgia hospital for a while. I took the bar exam in the state of Louisiana, passed the bar, went to work for Attorney General P.F. Grimion in the Civil Division of the State Court, where I spent about a year. During the job as a doctor and the lawyer, no one doubted for a second I was not that individual. It was I who resigned those posts and left on my own. Like any criminal, sooner or later you get caught. I was no exception to that rule. I actually was arrested just once in my life, when I was 21 years old, by the French police in a small town in southern France called Montpellier. The French police were actually arresting me on an Interpol warrant issued by the Swedish police, who were looking for me for forgery in Sweden and believed that I was residing in France. When the French authorities took me into custody on the Swedish warrant, they realized I'd forged checks all over France. So they refused to honor the warrant from Sweden, and Sweden's request for my extradition. They later convicted me of forgery and sent me to French prison. I served my time in a place called the Maison d'Arrêt, the house of arrest, in a small town in southern France called Perpignan. Steven Spielberg told Barbara Walters it was extremely important to me to go back to that prison, back to the exact cell Frank was in, and reconstruct it according to the logbooks during his stay there. He said to his amazement, that was a blanket on the floor, no mattress, a hole in the floor to go to the bathroom, no plumbing, no electricity. He said, I entered the prison according to their logbooks at 198 pounds, left the prison at 109 pounds. When my sentence was over in France, I was extradited to Sweden, where I was later convicted of forgery in the Swedish court of law, and then sent to a Swedish penitentiary in Malmö, Sweden. When my prison term was up in Sweden, U.S. federal authorities took custody of me. They returned me to the United States, and eventually a United States federal judge would sentence me to 12 years in federal prison. I served 4 of the 12 years at a federal prison not far from here in Petersburg, Virginia. After 4 years, at the age of 26, the federal government offered to take me out of prison on the condition I go to work for an agency of the federal government for the remainder of my sentence or until my parole had been satisfactorily completed. I agreed and was released. This year I'm celebrating 41 years with the FBI. I've been at the Bureau for 4 decades. I work out of Washington, D.C. I make my home in Charleston, South Carolina, and commute up to Washington. I live in Charleston with my one and only wife of 40 plus years and my 3 sons. My youngest boy graduated from the University of Beijing in China, got his master's degree at the University of Beijing. He writes, reads, and speaks Chinese fluently. He designs games for the Chinese market for an American gaming company based in San Francisco. His games are on mobile phones in China. They're in their 4th generation. His games are some of the most popular games in China. My middle son graduated from the University of Nevada, and his degree was in hotel administration. He and his wife graduated together. They own a business in South Carolina, and they manage that business together. And my oldest boy, who's 38, he graduated from the University of Kansas at KU. He went on to Loyola School of Law in Chicago to get his law degree, passed the bar in Illinois, went on to make his dad very, very proud. He's an FBI agent. He's been in the Bureau about 12 years. He's a supervisor over our crisis negotiations unit that deals with American citizens kidnapped overseas. He operates out of Quantico, Virginia's response team. As many of you know, I had very little to do with the film. I would have preferred not to have a movie made about my life. I actually raised my 3 boys in the same house for 25 years in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and commuted to Washington. Most of my neighbors had no idea who I was. But Steven Spielberg told Barbara Walters that he felt compelled to tell the world the story, not because of what I did, but because of what I had done for my country. He wanted the world to know the redemption side of the story. In the end, my family and I were very pleased with the outcome of the film, and we thought in a couple of years it would all die off and be forgotten. We never dreamed that Catch Me If You Can would go on to earn more than $1 billion for DreamWorks and be shown over and over on television just about every single week through HBO and other networks. And of course, then become a Broadway musical, win the Tony, and now be shown at high schools and community theaters around the country as well. So consequently, every Monday when I come to work, I have emails. And those emails come from all over the world. There are people seeing the movie for the first time. I know the play's in Germany right now, in Austria, people seeing the play for the first time, and they feel compelled to write. And when they send the email, I'm sure they figure I'll never see the email. They're not looking for a response. They just feel they want to make a statement. I do find it interesting that the emails come from people as young as 8 years old, people as old as 80 years old. The people who write, some say, you know, you were a genius, you were brilliant. I was neither. I was just a child. Had I been brilliant, had I been a genius, I don't know that I would have found it necessary to break the law and just to simply survive. And while there are people fascinated by what I did 50 years ago as a teenage boy, I've always looked upon what I did was something that was immoral, illegal, unethical, and a burden I live with every single day of my life. I will until my death. There are many who write and say, well, you know, you were certainly gifted. That I was. I was one of those few children that got to grow up in the world with a daddy. Now the world is full of fathers. But there are very few men worthy of being called daddy by their child. I had a daddy who loved his children more than he loved life itself. Steven Spielberg would later write that the more I researched Frank's youth without ever having met Frank, I couldn't help but put his father in the film through the likes of Christopher Walken. My father was a man who had 4 children, 3 boys and a daughter. Every night at bedtime, he'd walk into your room. He was 6'3". He would drop down on one knee, kiss you on the cheek, pull the cover up, and he'd put his lip right up on your earlobe, and he'd whisper deep into your ear, I love you. I love you very much. He never, ever missed a night. As I grew older, I sometimes fell asleep before he got home, but I always woke up the next morning, knew he had been by my bedside. Years later, my older brother joined me in my room. He was 6'4", in the Marine Corps, played semi-pro football for Buffalo, but my father would walk around to his bed, hug him, kiss him, whisper in his ear he loved him. When I was 16 years old, I was just a child. All 16-year-olds are just children, much as we like them to be adults. They're just children. And like all children, they need their mother and they need their father. All children need their mother and their father. All children are entitled to their mother and their father. And though it is not popular to say so, divorce is a very devastating thing for a child to deal with and then have to deal with the rest of their natural life. For me, a complete stranger said I had to choose one parent over the other. That was a choice a 16-year-old boy could not make. So I ran. How could I tell you my life was glamorous? I cried myself to sleep till I was 19 years old. I spent every birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day in a hotel room somewhere in the world where people didn't even speak my language. The only people that associated with me were people who believed me to be their peer, 10 years older than I actually was. I never got to go to a senior prom, high school football game, share a relationship with someone my own age. I always knew I'd get caught. Only a fool would think otherwise. The law sometimes sleeps, but the law never dies. I was caught. I went to some very bad places. My boys have grown up asking their mother, why is it Dad gets up in the middle of the night and goes down the TV room? Because you know he doesn't turn the TV on. He just sits there all night, because there are things you can't forget, things you're not meant to forget. While I was sitting in that pitch black cell in France, my father, 57, was climbing the subway stairs of New York as he did every day. He was in great physical shape. He just happened to trip. He reached his arm out to break his fall. He slipped, hit his head on a rail, and landed at the bottom of the step. He was dead. I didn't know he was dead. I was sitting in that pitch black cell, thinking about him, how much I couldn't wait to see him, hold him, hug him, kiss him, tell him how sorry I was, but I never got the opportunity to do that. I was very fortunate because I was brought up in a great country where everybody gets a second chance. I owe my country 800 times more than I could ever repay it for the opportunities it's given me these past 40 plus years. That is why I'm at the FBI today, still, 32 years after a federal court order has expired requiring me to do so. I have turned down 3 pardons from 3 sitting presidents of the United States because I do not believe, nor will I ever believe, that a piece of paper will excuse my actions, that only in the end, my actions will. 40 plus years ago on an undercover assignment in Houston, Texas, I met my wife. When my assignment was over, I broke protocol to tell her who I really was. I didn't have a dime to my name, but I eventually asked her to marry me against the wishes of her parents. She did. I could sit up here and tell you that I was born again, or I saw the light, or prison rehabilitated me, but the truth is, God gave me a wife. She gave me 3 beautiful children. She gave me a family, and she changed my life. She, and she alone. Everything I have, everything I've achieved, who I am today is because of the love of a woman, and the respect 3 boys have for their father, something I would never, ever jeopardize. There comes a time in all of our lifetimes that we grow older and we have children. And as every parent in this room knows, whether your child is 3 months old or 38 years old, when you lay your head on a pillow at night, you're just about to close your eyes, the last thing that you think about, the last thing you worry about are your children. And those nights never end. So if you still have your mother, you still have your father, you give him a hug, you give him a kiss, you tell him you love him while you can. And to those men in the audience, young and old, I would remind you what I remind students at the Academy, what it is to actually be a real man. It has absolutely nothing to do with money, achievements, skills, accomplishments, degrees, professions, positions. A real man loves his wife. A real man is faithful to his wife. And a real man next to God and his country put his wife and his children as the most important thing in his life. Steven Spielberg made a wonderful film, but I've done nothing greater, nothing more rewarding, nothing more worthwhile, nothing has brought me more peace, more joy, more happiness, more content in my life than simply being a good husband, a good father, when I strive to be every day of my life a great daddy. God bless you and thanks for coming to see me. I'll be happy to take questions. They can be about